So as we get started this morning, the question that I have on my mind today I'd like to pose to you is, do you ever struggle to kind of really feel like you have a sense of purpose in your life? I mean, beyond making another dollar, beyond kind of waking up today and doing kind of what I did yesterday and today, and I got through it yesterday, so I'll probably get through it today. You know, do you struggle to kind of say, man, I wish I had a deeper sense of meaning beyond survival in my life? But if someone showed you that path and said, you know, here's the path towards deeper meaning, would you be willing to take the step onto the path and follow it? Or would there be things you're holding on to that, you know, that maybe they're not perfect, but Jesus gives me security and I just can't leave that behind? Because I think oftentimes what affects us when it comes to finding meaning in our lives is the things that we hold on to. The things that we just can't seem to step away from. Those things, and you hear me say this often, the things we think we're holding on to are often the things that have a hold of us. The term for that is addiction. Right? And when we think about addiction, it can be chemical, it can be alcohol, but it can be money. It can be security. It can be anything. And so what I want to talk about a bit today is this idea of how do we kind of follow a path towards meaningfulness in our lives. And the thing that I was thinking about over this past week as I was putting this together, or kind of thinking through, I put it together the previous week, but I was kind of thinking about what to kind of do with it. I was thinking about the most important topic in this region, the Patriots. Not big NFL fans, clearly, right? Okay, good. I know Ruthie. I can count on Ruthie. We kind of count on Ken, but he's got that Eagles thing. I don't even understand that. And I grew up in the Eagles region, so I really don't understand it, sort of thing. But you know, I came to New Hampshire at the perfect moment. Lived in New York City for a number of years. I came to New Hampshire. Do you know what year I came to New Hampshire? The year 2000. Do you know why that's important? It's the year Tom Brady started the Patriots. Following year 2001, he led them to their first Super Bowl win ever. They'd been there before, didn't do as well. And the thing that, how this applies here, like, where is he going with this? Is that, you know, being a Patriots fan, Tom Brady gave us almost 20 years of just awesome football. But the thing that I was thinking about is that if you watch someone like Tom Brady, or honestly, any of the great quarterbacks, whoever's on that list for you, there's something they have to do to be successful. Because think about what is the job of a quarterback, right? Is that they snap the ball, the ball goes to him. What happens in that moment? A line of somewhere between 6 and 8 men, twice his size, are doing everything they can to reach him and do what? Pick him up and throw him on the ground. And for the quarterback to do his job, in most cases he's going to be doing a pass play, particularly Tom Brady, that he's got to find his receiver. And here he stands in this mass of humanity coming at him. And what does he have to do? He has to step into the throw. He has to walk directly towards the most scary thing on the field at that moment. Because if he doesn't step into the throw, the odds of that pass being complete are almost zero. But if he's willing to step into the fear and follow through, the ball lands where it needs to land. And I think for us in our lives, if we're going to find purpose, we're going to have to do the same sort of thing. That our path towards meaning, our path towards deeper purpose will almost always require a step of faith. A willingness to step towards something that is bigger than you can do on your own. And you'll probably have to face something scary. And if you're not willing to step into it, you're not going to follow through. You're not going to complete the path. You're not going to land where you could be. Because even though it might be scary, we need to be willing to take that step. And so this morning as we talk about this, I want to talk about the importance of taking that step. Right? Our willingness to recognize that the way we find purpose in our lives involves doing scary things. I'm not saying that you should be reckless. I'm not saying you have to walk around terrified all the time. In fact, that you probably shouldn't be doing that, right? Right? But God calls us to stretch ourselves. Because bottom line, if you can do the whole thing yourself, you're probably not inviting God into it. It's that willingness to go beyond what we feel like we can do. And to be clear, these don't have to be huge things. Right? This might be willing to just, be involved in someone's life and just be there for them. And even though that might be challenging, because when relationships get real, relationships sometimes get hard. Right? And all those things are an important part of finding purpose, right? Being in relationship and doing the things that we can do. And I think that if we're willing to do that sort of thing with our lives, more than one life gets changed. That when we're willing to do that sort of thing, it certainly changes our life. But we also get to be part of changing other people's lives. And so, with that on our minds, what I want to do today is I want to walk through a narrative from the gospel writer Matthew. You can probably guess which one it is if you've been in a church for any length of time. It's the event where Jesus walks on water. And it's interesting here because this particular part of the Gospel of Matthew includes some of the kind of Jesus' most famous things, right? The miracle of feeding the 5,000, right? The miracle of walking on the water. But it's interesting that, if you've been in church for much of your life, you could hear those things and you're like, yeah, that's cool, fed 5,000, But for the people who were there, it's incredibly different, right? So as we jump into this narrative, the disciples have been with Jesus for a period of time. And Jesus had actually just had a very emotional event in his life, that John the Baptist, the man who had been sent to announce his arrival, had just been executed. And so this event's going on in the background. And Jesus is out, he finds out about it, and he's got this crowd of people who've been kind of seeking him and kind of following him. And despite what he's dealing with, he takes time and he has compassion on these people. Right? And the disciples who are with him see Jesus with this compassion for people. And as Jesus, cares for these people, he's healing people. And as the day wears on and it's starting to get late, realize that the people need to be fed. And as this miracle, right, that there's only this small amount of food, right, a few pieces of bread, some fish. And Jesus says to his disciples, tell the people to sit down. We're going to feed them. And the thing that's kind of interesting about this is that Jesus' disciples had witnessed many miracles that he had done, but what's really neat about this particular miracle is they're actually very involved in it. And the thing that I always like to remind us is that when I was a kid and I would read these stories, I always thought of that the Bible people weren't real people, right? In other words, I don't think it wasn't that I thought they were fake. I just thought they were different than us. They were Bible people. They knew the Bible stuff. We want to remember that they're real people with real emotions and real experiences like we have. And so when Jesus says we're going to feed these people, they're kind of like, okay, helping a guy walk is one thing, but there are 5,000, and it's called feeding the 5,000. But how many people were there actually? Who knows? Nobody. More. Because it's actually documented as 5,000 men. Didn't count the women, didn't count the children. So we could easily say he's feeding twice that number. And so what Jesus does with the disciples, he says, I want you guys to be part of what I'm doing here today. So I want you to go out there and get everybody to sit down. And then Jesus has this small amount of food. And he says, you guys are going to pass the food out. And they're thinking, well, this isn't going to take long, right? But instead, he just starts handing them the food. And they head out. And the food continues. And before long, everyone is eating. And then when it's all done, Jesus said, you guys go pick up whatever's left over, right? We don't want to be wasteful. Go collect what's been left over. And when they collect what's left over, it was more than they started with. And they're like, wait a minute. This is something here now. I mean, if you're a part of that, how does that affect you? I will tell you that when I was down in Florida, one Thanksgiving, I hadn't planned to tell this story, so I get a little bit emotional, so stay with me. We go in Florida, not far from Disney World, there's these hotels that people live in because it's the only thing that they can afford. They pay day to day or at best week to week. And so a person had volunteered to actually buy Thanksgiving dinner for everyone in one of the hotels. And so there was a guy in our church who kind of connected with that kind of ministry with these hotels. And so he arranged a food truck to come out. And the food truck guy was like, well, how many people do you expect? They're like, we don't know, like maybe 100. And the truck pulled up, and we started to hand out the food. And people just kept coming. And there was no way there was going to be enough food. No way. And this is what's so amazing. These people who are hungry, who are unhoused, who are just trying to survive. And we said, guys, we don't think there's enough food. Can you please let the kids eat first? And people who are hungry stepped aside and let the children go first. And then once we'd fed all the kids, the people got back in line. And we fed over 120 people on an order of 100 food. Now you might say, well, that's not really a miracle. I mean, sure, he's supposed to be 100. He overpacked a bit. Well, I will tell you, if a food truck driver overpacks by 20%, that's a miracle, right? Because their margins aren't huge, right? And just to throw it in, we had 2 meals left over, by the way, right? And when you're part of something like that, it changes you. Because you know what? You're scared. I was scared. I was scared it was going to run out. And I would have to be the person that said, I'm sorry. There's no more. But I didn't have to do that. And so think about these disciples. They've just had that experience. They're like, woohoo, yeah, right? They're pumped. They got it. I was pumped. You know? I mean, I was crying on both sides of it. I was crying because I thought we were going to run out of food. Then I was crying because we didn't run out of food. And I'm talking about, an extra 20 meals. This is thousands. And they're like, whoo, Jesus is the man. I'm the man who's with the man. And this is awesome. We're going to stay tight to Jesus. Everything's going to be awesome. And then Jesus asked them to do something. Matthew tells us this. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So they're like, okay, well, all right, we've been hanging with Jesus. This is good. He's going to kind of, wrap things up here. We'll hop in the boat. We'll get started. He'll hop in another boat, be right behind us. He'll probably even catch up to us somehow because he seems to do that sort of thing. But that's not what happens. Matthew tells us that after Jesus had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. In other words, he didn't follow right behind them. He had to take care of himself a little bit. He had to get away, get some time with God, rejuvenate himself. And even later that night, he was there alone. In other words, the hours are ticking by, and the disciples are like, is he coming? He's nowhere to be found. And as it continues, it says, and the boat that the disciples were in was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. See, the disciples have just had a really huge change, right? They're experiencing a lot of emotions, right? They were having these super high emotions earlier when they're with Jesus and everything is fine. They were feeling great. And now they're kind of like, where's Jesus? I mean, just a couple of hours ago, that Jesus was right here with me, and I could see him, and I could feel his presence, and I knew he was here. And now I'm alone. I'm cold, and I'm wet, and I'm tired, and I'm scared. And keep in mind that some of the people in this boat were professional fishermen. So if they're scared, it's bad. Land is nowhere in sight, and Jesus is nowhere in sight. Do you ever have an experience like that? That you were in this moment of life where you're kind of like, man, I know God is with me. I can feel the comfort of Jesus in my life. That I've just got that peace. I just know he's here. But then something happens, and something in your life blows up. You know what we call the storms of life, right? You get hit by a storm in your own life. And suddenly it feels like Jesus is nowhere in sight. And you feel like you're alone. And you're like, it felt so good when he was here, and I don't know why he's not here now, and I don't know if he's ever going to get here. And I don't know how I'm going to get through it. I wish I could get back to that feeling I had before, but I don't know how I'm ever going to experience that again. I got to think that's a lot what it was like for the disciples. And for the disciples, their challenge was just beginning. Because what is good news for them, they don't know is good news. Because as it carries on, it says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Now, the key phrase here for the disciples at this moment is shortly before dawn. When did this trip begin? Yesterday, just after dinner. So through the whole night, they're getting pounded by waves. They're getting pounded by wind. The boat is rocking. I mean, I got to wonder if someone thought it was going to sink. Now, clearly, the scriptures do not say that, but I just got to imagine what it was like for them. And now it's somewhere between like 4 and 6 in the morning. And think of this emotional roller coaster that they have been on. Feeling super high, super up just a few hours ago, to flat and lonely, to terrified. And it's been going on all night. And I think some of them were afraid they weren't going to make it. And so in the midst of that experience, they look out across the lake and they see a figure on the water. And in their minds, this was not good news. Because it says, when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said. And they cried out in fear. They are physically exhausted. They are emotionally exhausted. They had so much excitement, and now it feels like it's all falling apart. And now they think they actually see a ghost. And in that dark moment of hopelessness, right, where they just like, what else can happen? Jesus calls out to them. It says, but Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Do you know what the most repeated command in the Bible is? Don't be afraid. Why do you think it's in there so much? Because if we're doing what it says, if we do what James invited us to do, which is don't just read it, but do what it says, it often involves being afraid. Because doing things that have impact are scary. Doing things that make a difference are scary. Talking to a person that you know about your faith is scary. Opening up yourself to real relationships is scary. The work that we're called to do at times is scary. And so God and Jesus are reminding us over and over again to don't be afraid. Right, I'm with you. So as Jesus calls out to them, what's going to happen? Because as Jesus calls out, it's kind of like, that I guess I want to kind of back up for a second. As we look at Jesus calling out to them, what do you think these disciples were going through? Right? That Jesus is the one who told them to go on this journey. Right? And if Jesus told you to do it, then it was supposed to be easy, right? No. Somehow that has become a misunderstanding. Right? That if it's hard, then I must, sorry, now I'm getting very excited, sorry. If it's hard, I must not be doing what God has asked me to do. Wrong, right? That doing what we're called to do is hard. And that's okay, right? That doesn't mean it has to be terrible. Doesn't mean it can't be joyful, right? But God invites us into big things, right? God invites us to be world changers, right? God can do everything on his own. But he chooses to do it through his followers. So people who put their faith in him. Because there's something that happens when we have to step out and put our faith in God to do the things he's leading us to do. Our faith grows. Even when we're not successful. It's the journey that actually makes the difference. Something that I say often. God is far more interested in who you become than he is in what you do. He's more interested in who you become than he is in what you do. But who you become is influenced by what? What you do. Actions matter. The way we live out our lives matters. So as these disciples are so afraid, Jesus calls out and just says, hey, I know you're scared, but you're not alone. I'm here with you. You know, and as the disciples heard that, I got to wonder if they were like, well, cool, you're here now, but what took you so long? Have you ever had that? God, where are you, man? Why is it taking so long? And I don't know why it takes so long. But sometimes it does. And it's in those moments that we are deeply changed. So for the disciples, right, they are exhausted, they are cold, they are wet, they are tired. They hear Jesus call out. How are they going to respond? Well, let's look at Peter. Here's how Peter responds. Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Right? Peter's response is, look, I'm grateful that you're here, but I'd like to be closer to you. I don't want to just watch you approach. What does Peter want to do? I want to walk with you. I want to be part of the journey that you're on, Jesus. Right? That's the invitation to all of us, to be on that journey. And when Peter calls out and says, Jesus, I see you, but I want to walk with you. That's a request that gets answered. That's a prayer that gets answered. Jesus, I want to walk with you. I want to be on the journey that you're going to lead me on. And so Peter asks that. And Jesus says, come. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Peter took that first step, and he famously stepped out of the boat. Now, how scary must that have been? Forget the fact he's about to try to do something impossible. I mean, the boat wasn't great, but it was there. But Peter steps out. Now, we all know Peter fails, blah, 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 right? We'll talk more about that in a minute. But Peter responds one way. How does everyone else in the boat respond? They sit there. They clung to the boat. Now, that's not completely unreasonable, right? The boat's been keeping them out of the water all night. The boat's kind of nice, right? But was it nice? How dry do you think that boat was after 6-8 hours of being in the rain and the wind? Not dry. It is wet and it is nasty. It is not remotely comfortable. In fact, given the choice of being in that boat or pretty much anywhere else, they would have rather been anywhere else. But as hard as being in that boat was, they couldn't bring themselves to step out of it. It was far easier to remain sitting in their discomfort, clinging to it, than it was to step out and follow Jesus' invitation. They'd rather sit and be uncomfortable in wet underwear rather than follow Jesus' invitation to step out. They heard Jesus call. They looked at the storm. They said, you know what? My security is this boat. I'm going to hold on to my security. I can't right now. You see, that was a big difference between Peter and the other folks in the boat. For the people in the boat was their security. But for Peter, Jesus was his security. And the thing that I want to invite all of us to ask ourselves about, and please understand, this is not condemnation. As I always say, I write the sermons that I need to hear. What is security that you're holding on to that's keeping you from stepping out? And I ask myself those same questions. What's the security that I'm holding on to that's keeping me from stepping out? Even though wherever I'm holding on to, it may be very much uncomfortable, and I would like to be in a different place. But stepping away from that is just too hard, just too scary. I just can't take that step. And so we remain stuck in the place we've always been. Getting through another day, making another dollar, doing the same thing today as I did yesterday and saying, no, it's not so bad. As opposed to stepping out into the life that Jesus invites us into. But Peter took that chance, right? Peter stepped out of the boat. Now, of course, we know what happened to Peter. It says that when Peter saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. And what happens? Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand, caught him. You of little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? You know, when I was taught as a kid that Jesus was kind of finger wagging in the middle of it, grab a hold of him. Why did you doubt? Well, I'm walking on water. It's a little scary, right? But I don't think that's how it went down. I think Jesus' heart hurt for Peter. Peter, you were doing it. You had it. You had your eyes on me. But why did you doubt? But notice what happened in Peter's life. Peter journeyed across the water, and Peter doesn't have to wonder if Jesus would save him in the future. Peter knows Jesus shows up. Because Peter stepped out and took that chance and answered that call, he now has direct personal experience that when he starts to fall, Jesus is right there. And he felt the grip and the strength of Jesus' hand in the midst of his sinking. And now he goes, you know what? When I take a chance, Jesus is right here with me. And yes, you know, Peter looked around and he was afraid. But keep in mind that all the folks in the boat were afraid. Right? They'd all been afraid all night, but Peter did not let his fear keep him from following what Jesus had invited him to do. And I think it's also important to remember that Peter did have some success. First of all, the most successful person in this boat, right? He got farther on the water than anyone else did because they didn't even try. And we know that Matthew actually tells us that Peter walked on the water and came towards Jesus. So he made it some distance, right? Maybe it wasn't the journey he was hoping for. Maybe it wasn't the great success that he hoped it would be. But he made it at least part of the way. He made it as far as he was capable of in that moment. And again, farther than anyone else did in the boat. And he got far enough along that he couldn't even grab onto the boat, right? Because he was sinking and he couldn't grab onto anything. And so Jesus got right there for him. So he did something. And the thing that's really important for us to remember is that although that journey was not what he wanted it to be, maybe it was the journey he needed at that moment in his life. He was willing to take the step. He got that experience of knowing that Jesus was there for him, even in his fear. And we know this certainly changed Peter's life, but here's the thing. Even though this journey was not the success that Peter had hoped for, it impacted other people's lives as well. Because the narrative goes on to tell us that when Peter and Jesus climbed back into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So those who were in the boat worshiped Jesus and said, "You are the Son of God." Now we might read that and go, well, yeah, they're his disciples. They already knew he was the Son of God. Like what's the big deal? But that's not necessarily true. If you read through the Gospels, you find that people were always kind of confused on who is Jesus. We're not sure who he is. Is he a Messiah? Is he a prophet? Is he a charlatan? Is he something else? And keep in mind, many of his disciples had those same questions. Even in spite of the fact that they had seen him create miracles, and they'd seen him feed people, it seems that many of the disciples still had doubts. But now suddenly in this moment, in Peter's quote-unquote failure, they declare that, Jesus, you're the Son of God. Maybe it just is that something about that event, something about Peter's willingness to take action changed their experience. Maybe it was in seeing Peter walk on the water. Right? Jesus walking on the water, he does stuff we can't do all the time. Right? But he invited Peter, and Peter was able to do that. And when Peter started to sink, Jesus was right there. And for whatever reason, that moved their hearts. Now, again, I'm not saying that Peter did this on his own. But here's what I think happened. And again, this is my opinion. I think the part of God's plan involved Peter stepping out and this moment coming together. And it was God's plan for this group of people in this boat to see that Jesus was the Son of God. And it was Peter's willingness to take action that God worked through that action. Just like he does in our lives. Right? It's when we take action. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? That we know that God's will is not always done. We talked about this in detail a couple weeks ago. Because it's God's will that all will come to know him. And we know that's not the case. So God's will is not always done. So that means that our actions matter somehow. That when Jesus invites us to do something, if we say, I'm not going to do it, that means the outcome of that action never occurs. And in this case, Jesus invited Peter to step out of the boat. And God moved through that moment to reveal to the people in that boat who Jesus was. And see, the thing that I want us to really remember in this is that our actions change lives. Right? Just as Jesus invited Peter to take action that was part of something God was doing, he invites you to take action that's part of what God is doing. Right? That as people put our faith in Jesus, we are called to be people of action. And the question is that what's the right action for your life? Right? Because we're all different, right? We have different skills, we have different abilities, we're in different stages of life. So of course that we're all going to have, ministries of our own. The things that Jesus is calling you to do that's specific to you, that capitalizes on your skills, abilities, opportunities. But there's also things that God calls all of us to do. So what is the thing we have in common? Right? Because we talked about this again a couple weeks ago, right? Is that there's this idea that we have our personal ministry, that thing that we're called specifically to do, but we also have collective ministry, right? The ministries we come together to do. Right? And so what's our collective ministry? If you're a Jesus follower, you're someone who's put your faith in God, you're someone who's put your faith in Jesus, what is our collective ministry as being part of that family? Well, that takes us back to James. Right? Because years after this event with Peter and Jesus on the water, James is now a head of the Church of Jerusalem. James writes this. He says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Now, James says to care for widows and orphans in their distress. Why does he name those individually? Like if someone isn't an orphan, we're not supposed to help them? If someone isn't a widow, are we not supposed to help them? No, he chose widows and orphans because in the time frame he lived in, a widow or an orphan would be completely unable to take care of themselves. So they were the most vulnerable people in his population. And so what James is saying is that, you know what, when God talks about religion and what God values about his followers is taking care of those who are vulnerable. Right? I mean, what is the business of the Father? Right? As Christians, when we look back on the life of Jesus, what was the Father's business? What was Jesus doing? Because Jesus did the Father's business. Right? Jesus did three things, right? Jesus taught, which means he was building disciples, right? That Jesus actually told people about the kingdom of God. In other words, he was evangelizing, right? He was sharing his faith. And he healed people, meaning he relieved suffering. That as Jesus followers, part of our call in life is to relieve suffering. And so we are all called as a collective ministry to care for the most vulnerable among us. And if I'm honest, that I've been alive 60 years, 60 years. I'm not 16, I'm 60, right? In case you were wondering about that. Oh, come on, that's funny. I mean, I look good, but not 16 good, right? I mean, come on. Right, but I truly believe in the 60 years that I've been alive, the vulnerable population is more vulnerable than it ever has been in my 60 years. And be clear, this is not a political statement. Whatever policies led to this moment, you may think they're the worst policies in the world. You may think they're the best policies in the world and long overdue. I don't care what you think about that. What I know is that the people at the bottom are hurting. Right? The unhoused population just keeps getting worse and worse. We live in a city that has a rental availability rate below 0.6%. People don't make enough money to be indoors. I talk to people who come to our soup kitchen sometime. A man in his late 60s worked his entire life, lives in his car, because his $2,000 a month check from Social Security, he can't have food, the medical care he needs, and housing. I met a man who came to our food pantry a few months ago that was in his 70s. He and his wife are newly homeless because she had a major medical event. And, we could argue whether he had to do this or not. He felt he had to do this. He sold their home to pay off the medical bills. He just couldn't stand carrying that any longer. That there are people who have worked hard their whole lives, who are down and out. There are people who are working right now who cannot house themselves, right? That food scarcity is growing, right? If you go to the grocery store, right? Bonnie was telling me today, there's something that we used to get for $2 for $5. There was $2 for $7 this week, right? Those things are just clicking up. And if you're making $10, $12, $15 an hour, you work 60 hours a week. You can't cover all those bills, right? So we all know people in those circumstances, right? We are all called to be part of that solution of relieving that suffering, right? As a church, we do what we can. We have the food pantry. So the folks here in the area can come out and get the groceries they need to help supplement what they're doing. Right? We partner with the Open Door Community Kitchen, right? So that people can come and get a hot meal a couple times a week. And we also have kind of the various things we do throughout the year to make a difference. And so what we're going to do is, wrong button. Next week we're going to start our collection for the Conquer Coalition to End Homelessness. Now, some of you will remember that we did this last year. Last year, we actually had Kate from the coalition kind of give us a bit of a rundown on kind of what the problem was. But I think at this point, we're pretty aware of it, is that there is a housing shortage, which causes prices to go up, and many people just cannot afford it. So what we'll do starting next week, we'll just start collecting for that. If you recall, the way we do it is each week I'll give you one of my funny little cards about something that I want you to bring, and if you want to participate, you bring that the following week. Right? The care team kind of coordinates all this for us, and in addition to the stuff that we bring in as a congregation, our care team also goes out and purchases other items to help out, and it allows us to kind of go deliver those to the coalition to be handed out to the people who are in need. Right? So that's kind of a great way for us all to kind of come together to do something. But what I want to remind us of is that we are also all called to a personal ministry. Who do you know in your life that you could lighten the load for a little bit? I'm not saying your life is easy. I want to be really careful about that. I know that many of us here are really struggling. But, maybe you can help some way with money. Maybe you can help out with time, right? To do something to lighten the load for other people, right? That in times like this, the way we get through is by lifting other people up. And the thing that I want you to understand is that when you step out in faith like that and you care for other people, God works through that in amazing ways. Right? As Peter stepped out of the boat, that action caused other people to see who Jesus was who were in the boat. When you step out in faith and you personally care for people and you're present in people's lives, that's a chance for Jesus to move through your life to help other people come to know him. And so when we embrace that kind of personal ministry as well as the power of our collective ministry, that's when we really come together to be part of being the presence of Jesus in this world, to be the love of Jesus in this world, and to point people in this world towards Jesus. There's a very kind of famous statement. I didn't make it up, but no one cares what you think until they know that you care. Right? The first part of the journey of being in the presence of Jesus is doing what Jesus did. He healed people. He cared for people. He lifted people up. And through that, people came to know him. And we are one family. As we come together as believers in Jesus, we are one family.